Hey, everybody. It's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Welcome to a sweltering Monday in late August. Hoping you all are safe and well wherever you might be. And in that spirit, I'm going to ask you where you all might be. If you would take a look at the bottom of your screen, maybe hover with your finger or your cursor, whatever you might have, and you'll see a chat function down there. Then in addition, you're also going to see a Q&A box and a live transcript. I'll tell you about those in a quick minute. But in that chat, you'll go ahead and open it up. It looks like a word cloud. Make sure you're talking to, it'll say everyone or all hosts and attendees, something like that. Just put your name in, where you're coming in from. And then this idea we've been borrowing from Professor Brene Brown down at the University of Houston. Hey, Aaron, if you would, indulge me, Aaron, because I think I know where you're at, but maybe I'm wrong. Your name, where you're coming in from, and then 2 words. How you doing just now? I am happy and hot today. So other folks want to join me. We'll just have a chance to kind of build a little community, say hello to one another. Fatima, how are you? Jill, how are you? Largo, Florida, and eating lunch right on. Okay, Stephen, Mark, Samantha, Chili and Damp. Yeah, you all just got, is it Henri or is it Henry? Someone has to tell me who's in the path. I'm glad everybody's safe and well. And it turned out a lot of water, but maybe not a lot of wind for y'all. So hopefully everybody's safe and well. Anne, how are you? Olivier, Rebecca, Dale, Taylor, Katrina, Susanna, Johanna, Courtney, Clarissa, Elle, Sarah. All right, you're going too fast for me, gang. But suffice to say, if and as you see names of folks you know we can't kind of tough to see each other just now, or it's been difficult over the last little while, go ahead and just say hello. You can talk to folks individually through the chat. So if you have a specific question. Other thing I should tell you about this chat is if and as Mark and Ebony and Lillian are sharing some links, we'll make a point of putting those in here for you. Our partner in crime, Kareem Alston, will help us with that. And with that, my other colleague here, Tristan Mahabir, is going to go ahead and advance the deck. A little bit of housekeeping to share with you all before we get into it. First one is this: September 8th is the deadline. And we should have put that like with sparkles or something. That's the deadline to register for ComNet B21. Or Mark's doing it for me. All right. I think right now we last counted this morning, I think we have about 100 plus seats left. So the deadline's the 8th or until we sell out, whichever comes first. But if you haven't registered, please do. Mr. T, if you would, take us forward. We've got some great stuff. Among the great things that are going to happen at B is the winner of the Clarence B. Jones Impact Award, which we just announced. United We Dream, the fabulous work that they've been doing over the years at the Supreme Court and elsewhere, raising awareness around the plight of young kids who were brought to this country and currently are in sort of legal limbo or have been for a while. Their communications work has been just extraordinary. So they're going to tell us the story of how that all came together, the strategies behind it. That'll be part of B21. They'll deliver a case study keynote as part of that Jones Award. And if you would, and our thanks to folks at the Heinz Endowments for sponsoring that for us again this year. Mr. T, if you would, carry us forward. This is another thing y'all know about, and that is we have 16 local groups gathering. Currently, it looks like this, a lot of Zoom screens remotely around the country, but we're really grateful to everybody to continue to build community because you can learn, inevitably, somebody knows what you don't, and this is the best way to do that. So these local groups are continuing to be active. Curious about that, we'll toss a link in there so you can find a city perhaps near you. They're all over the country, so chances are there's someplace nearby. Mr. T, if you would, take us forward. This is the other thing I want to tell you about. We started a listserv in the middle of the pandemic last year thinking, gosh, sometimes you're going to have a question. There's not a local meeting or what have you. Let's just throw it out to the group. And so over 1,000 people now helping each other out on the daily, everything from job postings to just any question that sort of comes to mind. Inevitably, there's several answers out there. And all of these are threaded, as you can kind of see on the slide. So you can get a sense that perhaps there's already an answer to a question you might come with. But help yourself to that. We'd love to have you. There's no charge. And you don't even need to be a network member to be part of that or our local groups. All right, if you would, Mr. T, take us forward. Last little piece, Kenya, I think, is pinned onto your screen. She's back. We are delighted to have her, and she is wearing this color much better than I am. But we are offering accessibility. Kenya will be offering ASL interpretation services across the hour. And at the bottom of your screen, I told you at the top, we talk about this, there's going to be a live transcript. Little box there that says CC, that's closed captioning. Fire that up if you want to. And then just adjacent to that, just to remind y'all, we're going to take questions throughout the session. And so that's where we're going to look for them. So if you put them in the Q&A box, we promise we'll take a look at them. And you can also look in there and you can vote for questions to make sure that one that's most relevant to you gets asked and answered. All right, everybody, with that, I'm going to shut up and you'll see me again during Q&A and towards the end. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, and I am delighted and grateful that Lillian and Ebony are with us as well. Mark, want to take it away?
Thanks so much. Appreciate that, Sean. Tristan, Kenya. Everybody. Hi, I'm Mark Dessauer, and here from Spitfire Strategies, we're going straight from the title slide right into our introductions. So honored to be a part of this. Like I said, Vice President of Learning at Spitfire Strategies. And I went through the funny small world thing here is that I went through one of the first Smart Chart trainings at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and have used the Smart Chart and strategic communications throughout my career. And it's brought me back full circle right here talking about the Smart Chart. And I'm really happy and I'm honored to be joined by Ebony and Lillian. Lillian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be in community with all of you. My name is Lillian Singh, and I'm Vice President of Programs and Racial Wealth Equity at Prosperity Now. Funny thing, we'll learn more about Prosperity Now and the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative, but I met actually Mark through a national funder who saw a connection. They saw that the work that they were funding Prosperity Now to engage with nonprofit leaders of color across the country needed to be strategically aligned with communications. And they were working with Mark already. And that work started in 2015. And so excited, that conversation, and then our first training in 2016. So 5 years later, and we're still rocking and rolling together. So good to be in community with all of you. And now I'll turn it over to my partner in crime, Ebony White.
Thank you, Lillian and Mark. It's great to be with all you today. My name is Ebony, Director at Prosperity Now over the Racial Economic Justice team, and I came to the team in 2018 and have definitely enjoyed working with Spitfire and of course this with Mark, because he's just a joy to be with. But as the lead implementer of the Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color project, I provide tailored technical assistance and capacity building to nonprofits that's led by leaders of color, really trying to strengthen their infrastructures and increase their understanding of racial economic equities, the role that their organization play, and really help them to build economic assets in their communities. And I also support them by creating opportunities for them to expand their networks locally and nationally, increase their visibility, lifting up their expertise as the great minds that we think that they are, and really trying to diversify the field. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and we will definitely get into some of the nitty-gritty of that, one of our signature programs at Prosperity Now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ebony and Lillian. Well, you're all here. Thanks to everyone who signed up is here. The objectives, which you read, setting clear objectives for social change outcomes, using communication planning, intentionally embracing the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, talking about how communications is changing there, and how you can use Spitfire's Smart Chart 4.0 framework to really draft a strategic communications plan, make it easier for all of your work to be more effective. That's the objectives. How are we going to make this happen? Here's the agenda. Let's get a little context and connection here and see how we came together. You heard a little bit from Lillian right there. And we'll dwell a little bit more about nonprofit communication challenges, how groups and foundations too, sometimes communications can be overwhelming or there's a lack of capacity. That leads us right into the Smart Chart. This is a little history of that there, what's been changed. And we'll talk about some of the case studies about how some of the groups that Ebony and Lillian have worked with, what they've done with this. And then we'll take a brief glance at the Smart Chart website, and we'll have additional questions there. So that's the overview. I appreciate being here in this opportunity. So let's move on. Lillian, let's hear a little bit more just overall about Prosperity Now.
Thank you, Mark. So Prosperity Now is a national intermediary organization, and we exist really to support local nonprofits across the U.S. because we believe that we all are fighting for and should have a right to a fair and just economy. We were founded in 1979, and our goal and continues to be really to center those who has been historically and systematically marginalized by partnering with communities and other influential stakeholders We have a new president, an amazing leader, Gary Cunningham, and we are finalizing and going through our new strategic framework, where we're looking to actually further create, identify, test, and amplify new and existing systems-oriented solutions to address the root causes of inequalities. Next slide, Mark. So in 2015, as we mentioned, when I actually had an opportunity to launch the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative in partnership with my other partner in crime, who's no longer at Prosperity now, but Deidre Kasante Muhammad, we started with the Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color Initiative as one of the key flagship projects that we will focus on at Prosperity Now. And this effort was really birthed out of an ideology that we wanted to actually launch and implement specific projects that will highlight best practices to bridge and address growing racial economic inequality across the US. So in 2016, we started in 2 cities. Mark was there with us. We were in Miami and New Orleans. We were working with just 10 organizations and 20 nonprofit leaders. In 5 years, we've been able to scale this project to 42 organizations, and we've partnered with over 100 nonprofit leaders. Our theory of change is that if we identify nonprofits of color ready for transformation, empower them through collaborative growth processes of education, development, and supportive leadership development opportunities, equip them, undergird them, strengthen their service delivery, their policy, and their advocacy arms, we can help them to be even stronger nonprofits and ready to really impact racial wealth inequality. And we designed this work with well-researched challenges that we knew these nonprofits were facing. They were facing the racial organizational capacity gap, because what the data tells us is that nonprofits and leaders of color are disproportionately forced into cycles of just attending capacity training. What does that really mean? So we sought out, and Ebony is going to share a little bit more about how our work is transformational capacity building training, which is why Mark has been in step with us the entire time. To also another challenge, which is our racial leadership gap. And this is where we know that, unfortunately, systemic biases and barriers, not individual deficiencies, limit access for nonprofit leaders of color and executive leaders to really thrive in the nonprofit sector. And the final piece is that we wanted to directly encounter and address the racial funding gap. We all see a new tide here with everything that's happening in America with the great racial reckoning. But we were actually, Prosperity Now was only, one of the first organizations to really name that there was actually a racial funding gap. And how do we actually address that? By lifting up and centering those nonprofit leaders of color as a part of the solution. So that's our project design in totality. And now I'll turn the floor over to Ebony, who's going to provide you all with an analysis of our core program objectives with building high impact nonprofits of color and how we do the work in the field.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Lillian said, in a summary, I would say the core objectives of the project is really to advance the participants' understanding of not only what the racial wealth divide is, what are the racial economic disparities that exist in their community. We really want to help them to expand and establish networks across sectors to advance social change. So we're really, again, trying to diversify the economic building, the asset building space. We want to help them to improve the ties and the relationships that they have between organizations of color, understanding that in many places, organizations are competing all the time. So really trying to figure out a way for them to work differently with each other, be in partnership and support each other. We also want to help them to improve their relationships with other organizations and stakeholders, and especially funding, because like Lillian mentioned, we want to be able to position them to get increased, more sustainable funding. And lastly, we want to equip them to be able to be leaders in the space, to be able to sit at these tables and really be part of the solutions and the asset building strategies. The other thing I want to mention while we're on this slide, so what you'll see is the basic components of all of our training. And we see all these components as equally being important. And we really strive to help our leaders to see how each should really build upon each other and not be thought about in silo ways, and that they really are interconnected. And Mark, as well as some of our other trainers, we really work together to make sure we make those connections across the trainings. The training is designed with an acute awareness of the systemic and the institutional challenges, which we know that some are implicit and some that are explicit that nonprofit executives are experiencing. So you'll see we have development and fundraising. So really trying to understand what's trending in the nonprofit philanthropy space, really trying to help them to understand what are some of the strategies and techniques for development and fundraising. We have strategic planning, which, all great achievements begin with a vision, that compelling destination, but really understanding that great achievements also require the steady and strategic action. So the training is really designed to help the leaders identify how to bring about the vision, that they really aspire for their organization. Financial management, which is a new component that we actually brought in this last recent cohort. And it's really, trying to give people an individualized review of what's happening with their finances. And due to the pandemic, I will say many nonprofits had to assess, they had to pivot their businesses and their financial models to be able to accommodate for the uncertainty that they may have been experiencing, and some of them experience increased funding. So really trying to figure out how to scale and even sustain what the different positions of their finances. Policy and advocacy, that's another piece. One of the things I'm sure you guys know is that there's a lot of nonprofits that see the need to actually be part of the policy and advocacy, and really trying to understand how they can educate their policymakers, their decision makers, and to build strong coalitions. So really trying to meet them where they are and provide some capacity building to them around that space. And we really tried to pair that with the racial economic equity analysis. One thing I will say, not only with the cultural lens, we really ground a lot of our work with that equity, that economic equity lens. And so one of the things that we do in all of the communities under this particular project is that we create racial wealth divide profiles that really highlight what those economic and wealth disparities are, what are some of the historical policies and practices that really have impacted what we're seeing in communities today, and really provide a training to help them understand how to not only analyze the data that they're seeing, but apply it to their approach, to their communication strategies, to how they connect it to the lived experiences of their clients. Leadership development, communications. I will say before I move to communications, which is what we're really going to hone in on today. With leadership development, I just want to stop and say, given the audience that we have today, that it's really important for investments into the leaders to be able to take the time that they need to be self-reflective, to be action-oriented, and to be the best leaders and visionaries that they can. And sometimes leaders feel like they don't have the time or the space, or they feel guilty for doing that. So really trying to get back to not only leadership development is as important, but it also is so much connected to just the, having that work-life balance, which I'm pretty sure that you guys know is so important, especially given what people have been experiencing. So communications, that's the topic that we're really going to be really honing in on today. And communications is something that is definitely connected to all these different elements. And you all know the importance of communications, or you wouldn't be here today. And having that effective communications plan, that framework for your strategic efforts is critical. If you don't have that, you can be spending a lot of time and not really engaging in getting the response that you really want. So we have a combination of targeted group and individualized training that we are able to engage them in our process of. So with all these elements, they not only have that group training, but that one-on-one training is the one that where I really feel like the magic happens, because they're actually able to move from theory to application. And if you know anything about trainings, typically you don't remember 80% of the training. And if
except for this webinar.
Except for this webinar.
Remember everything.
Right. But really, we're really giving people the coaching that they need to apply and to have that expertise there to really be able to have a better chance of being able to utilize the tools and the concepts. And so one of the things too that I just wanted to state real quickly here is that we also give our participants an organizational assessment where we're able to really analyze and see where people are so that we can really meet them where they are. So all of the trainings is really customized to address the specific communication needs that they have, and then really try to help them to hone in from there. Can you go to the next slide for me, please, Mark?
Yeah, we'll do, Ebony. I just want to note one thing here. It's so cool to have communications there alongside leadership development, that you see it that way. Something that both you and Lillian designed, that it's equal for many nonprofits and even some foundations. Communications is sort of on the side. And if you look at this, and for everybody out there, you need communications for development. You need communications for strategic planning, that internal change management that's there, policy and advocacy. A leader needs to do that. And as we'll talk in a little bit, that it needs to be grounded in racial equity right now more than ever, to understand that it works. But some nonprofits are having challenges.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so, even, thinking about the challenges that you just mentioned, due to some of the things, if we go back to what Lillian was mentioning earlier about lack of resources, lack of just access, a lot of one of the things that we really challenge people to do is not to think about capacity as something that is it's a negative construct on them. If anything, what we're really trying to do is to push people to look at capacity building in a different way. It's in a way where we're really trying to say it's not that they're lacking the ability to do these things, because they're already doing some great work with less resources, but it's really that they actually lack the resources to really be able to invest. One of the things that we're also really trying to shift is just around unrestricted funding. A lot of times people want funding for the programming, which is great, but if you only fund programming, you're not allowing them to invest in these pieces that's so important to the work that they're trying to do. So, lack of the resources, the time, money, people, all that is something that can really be shifted if we think about things a little bit differently. I would say one of the things is, communications is the expertise that all of our nonprofits, especially smaller-based, community-based nonprofits, they don't have that expertise in-house. And a lot of them don't even really have a consultant that they work with. They might work with a consultant for maybe a big campaign, but for the most part, that ongoing communication expertise is not in-house. So they're kind of learning it as they go. We also know that communication is vital externally and internally, right? So just how you want to hit the miss when it comes to your audience and being able to get to certain stakeholders, you also want to make sure that you are properly communicating with your staff so that they feel the best equipped and they understand what's going on to be able to represent that organization. And then, telling authentic narratives and really using racial lens and centering the clients. This is something too that, is really, I feel like I'm optimistic, but I feel like this is something that is beginning to shift more as far as really, being able to tell a story from the lived experience of that person, not necessarily different perspectives. And so one of the things that is interesting is, being able, like with the data, I would say, I like using data, but I honestly have to understand when too much data is too much data, but really being able to ground the experience of the community, and being able to understand when, even though you're really trying to be helpful, you're actually being harmful. So there's a lot of different topics, and I'm sure Mark is going to go into it a little bit later around the questions to ask yourself to see if you're actually being harmful. And so this is the type of training that we give our participants so that they can make sure that they're not part of the problem themselves. And lastly, we want this to be something that's not only helpful for our participants, but we want them to be able to then educate others internally as well as their other partners. And so like with the tool of the profile, they're actually able to use that and speak to it and really help others to understand this too. So it's a tool, it's a way to be able to educate, to advocate, and influence. And these are all the same three things that communications do as well. And so now I'm gonna actually ask Mark to just see if I missed anything, because I know you would do a
got it all, Ebony. No, this is, Lillian, this has been a fantastic experience working with these leaders, the groups that you've pulled together. And yes, these are the challenges that we've seen across nonprofit communications across the field. Is a second thought, and then everybody wants to go viral, or they want a lot of tactical things. So one thing, and this was a light bulb moment for me when I started my communications career, I was, I've got to do this communications plan, which is sort of separate from everything else. Well, it's actually when you start plugging communications into the overall organizational strategy, that's when things start to work. And particularly if you're a communications team of one and you're the alpha and the omega, or for many nonprofits, it's 25% of 5 people's time. So what the steps we recommend for anybody out there, what you want to do for strategic communications planning here, really start with what the organization needs to accomplish. Then this is what's crucial here. Understand the context of the work you're doing and the organization. Do you have the capacity to do that? What's going on in the environment right now? Understanding, are you in the dominant narrative or are you presenting a counter narrative? So really almost power mapping what is happening there. And then you start making the choices. The strategic ones based on what your audience cares about, what they want to do, what emotions to tap, and you build that into the messaging. Then you get to tactics. Finally, we get to, well, should this be a press release? Should this be a meeting? Should it be, a viral video or something? Any of those things, because, you can make viral videos just like that now. I ask my kids, they're the ones who do it. And then make sure that you are measuring success. So these are the 5 steps to start strategic communications planning for any of that. And before you go any further, a lot of groups that I've worked with in training hundreds of nonprofits, they come in with communication tactics. This is our goal. We want to plan around increasing our newsletter open rate or getting more followers on social media. And for all of that, you have to ask, really, to what end? Why do you want to do this? Dig deeper. Let's go build up to strategy. And you find out, actually, we're trying to engage Black parents of elementary school children, or we're increasing small dollar donations from college students via Instagram. This helps go beyond those broader tactical things, and you start with strategy. And if you do not ground your communications in the current issues that are going on now, if you do not understand and center equity in your work, this is the work that's there. But if you're not aware of or tying into the visible or invisible power structures by which some communities are privileged and others are discriminated against or hurt, then your communication is going to miss. And I know the Communications Network has, and this is a quick pitch there, you have a whole other site on DEI communications, but this is for any group, whether you're a funder or nonprofit. And this is what's key for everybody there, to understand that larger picture and how it fits in and where you might be missing the mark on that. So briefly, if there's any questions right now, we'll go into some case studies, and then we'll look into the SMART chart and see how that takes those 5 steps and does it. But if there are any questions, Sean, I don't know if you see any out there. right up front, just about nonprofit communications challenge?
Not yet, but this is a good chance to invite our friends. If and as you all have questions, please do go out into that Q&A box, and you can also vote for questions you want to see answered. But it sounds like for now, I think folks are interested to hear a little bit more about the tool.
Let's keep going, and we'll follow up with communications at the end. Well, so Kristen Grimm started Spitfire Strategies in 2002 and really came with the radical idea of how do we create a tool that brings all of the best tips, tricks, science into communication planning and put it into the SMART chart. Again, I went through one of the first trainings. It was the light bulb moment for me and really set the course for my rest of my career. So as Spitfire grew over the last almost 20 years, you're seeing it grow and the SMART chart grow and constantly being updated with new examples, new elements to it. And right now we have just over the summer unleashed the SMART chart 4.0. And this is a free tool that's out there. This is the tool that helps and is center of all the trainings that we do and the work we did with building high impact nonprofits of color. And this is something that we've made changes. And I want to walk briefly through that so you can see, but we'll hear right after this how groups have used the SMART chart to really make a larger impact. All right. First, wayfinding and design, using different icons and really breaking down the information into different bits that you can go and spend more additional time on. We've made it a lot more colorful, more illustrative, that's there. And you can see in the page design, you can click through on the PDF and get additional resources that are there, see the pro tips on the side. So really rethought, how do people read and use a tool like this? Another very exciting thing is we enriched it with science. It was always based in behavior economics, that's there, but we actually said, well, let's start quoting it and show how science backs up solid, smart communications. So this is a way to break down, and if you want to go deeper and geek out on it, you can go to the studies and going back for even more details. So we wanted to ensure that there is, we brought the receipts for all of this. So you can go deeper on the science there. We also, as the world of communication expands in this area, and we're understanding more about narratives and framing, want to make sure that as you're doing your communication planning and building that messaging, you're aware of the frames that are out there. You can identify the dominant and counter narratives, understanding which emotions you should select, or maybe some you should stay away with, and understand the priority of your audiences. So all of these things are in there to help you build a much more powerful and effective message. This is the message box that's in there. That hasn't changed. And one little hint, and Sean, you might, and others, you can use this on family members too. It worked for my kids. I have a story about Oscar learning to eat asparagus through this, but that's another time. We also really built the SMART chart to be much more relevant right now, and relevant in this racial reckoning and understanding that tools are not neutral. And so not only are the examples around racial justice that's in there, and we have examples coming from the work that we've done and nods to tools such as asset framing from Travian Shorters, we've really centered it in our work. And so as you're doing that work, asking your communications, are you being inclusive there? Are you aware of the power structures? Are your objectives that you're working on truly equitable? And so there are guides and hints throughout this SMART chart that remind and make those larger connections. That makes it more relevant, not just to the community members, but to the work that you're doing. And we call it a SMART chart. And of course, I've got to show you the chart. It's a chart. So you can see and unwrap that and download this. There's message boxes, all these things. We took through the groups working with Lillian and Ebony, we went through the SMART chart and they used them for various challenges that they had. And in Dallas, Texas, we worked with shared housing. Really fun group. Maria was there. And Lillian, did you want to share a little bit here? Or
I can. I can. Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Either one.
Thank you. Yeah. So Maria, so as Mark mentioned, they were out of Dallas, Texas, and they were in the process of trying to secure funding for a new community development that was called the Greenhouse Project. And you know, some of the, I would say the initial issues that they were really trying to work through was the fact that they had a very small team. They only had a few dollars, and they really lacked the visibility needed to be able to get their campaign out there and to build up the level of funding that they really needed. And at that time, there was a federal, the federal did have a focus on housing first for chronically homeless individuals, which was their target audience, was really trying to help people move from homelessness to housing. And so shared housing, they worked with Mark to develop a new pathway, a new strategy for how to engage some of their current and some untapped funders to help them to meet their goal and advocate for sustainable family solutions. And, you know, one of the things that they learned from working with Mark is that being small does not mean silence, and that they learned how to find their true voice in the community and to be able to really scale at the messaging that they were trying to get out. The role that they realized that they really played was that they were helping families to move beyond homelessness to long-term, more sustainable housing, and really helping them to create wealth for themselves. So really, you know, connecting the services that they was doing to that racial wealth divide, and really trying to get people to understand that they weren't really trying to provide short-term solutions. They were really, you know, this greenhouse project will actually provide some ongoing long-term living for those that were in homelessness. Some of the feedback that they provided us was that, you know, for one, they love the support of the cohort because it just gave them so much strength being able to have those peers. And so that's another piece that's part of this project that is unique, I would say, is that we're really giving leaders of color the space to be vulnerable and also be supportive with each other. And so it's a space where they don't have to show up in a nonprofit space where they can't really be true around where they have some opportunities to grow. And so another thing that, you know, Maria shared was that she really appreciated being able to engage and to deepen her commitment of existing in the new donors in a more authentic way, and moving around the making the ask. And so finding that message of that message that really influenced the head and the heart was the piece that she really appreciated being able to get Mark's support on. And then also just the fact that the professional coaching and assistant really kind of took her over the max, and it was really what she needed. She understood that Mark had good intentions, and he helped her to really be able to attain some new levels of success. And I would ask Mark just to jump in and just to say if there's anything that you would want to add on to this.
Well, they're breaking ground on it, which is really exciting. You can see Maria there in white in the middle. It's really allowing nonprofits to see the power of messaging. And it was using the SMART chart to say, oh, this specific audience, understanding the values. How are we going to get these high donors in Dallas to invest in this very different solution to deal with housing, and with community members to let's change the narrative around what affordable or housing for single moms who need that. And this is a really way that, like you said, Ebony, touched the head and the heart using the SMART chart and the messaging box there. Yes, Sean.
Mark and Ebony, our friend Angela has a question. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think it's actually, this is a good place to do it, which is, can you give an example, and maybe it's this one, of centering equity in communication? So not just having it as a goal, but what does it really look like in practice? Or maybe it's even a compare and contrast. How is it different than maybe where we might have been operating 10 years ago?
Initially in this, what was key was understanding the audiences and understanding how they defined and the larger narrative. And for this case, we can talk more, Angela, on the next case study on this, that housing was seen a certain way and that it was seen as, Ebony said, short-term solution, something there, and really said, these are by opening up not as a funder-defined problem that was there, that homeless moms in this neighborhood that are there saying, these are women with children, and taking sort of the person first perspective and understanding that they are not the ones, they are unhoused, they are not homeless. So really flipping a lot of the perspectives and how this community was seen, and allowed Maria to really reach the heart. That going through the message box and understanding the values there within the SMART chart, and really tapping into what's the dominant narrative there and checking that allowed them to say, let's reframe this in a different way. Let's talk about this and showcase what these moms want to do, what their struggles are. And it changed how the community then came to support that. And it was just a complete difference messaging from what the nonprofit normally did, saying we have to house this number of people, they've got to be here. And the community saw it as something threatening. So that's one example, and understanding the narratives that were there. I don't know, Ebony or Lillian, was there anything?
I don't have anything to add to this particular one, but I think with some of the other ones, we can, I don't know if Lillian does.
No, I think the next example, Mark, be able to help us with answering that question, DCRAC. DCRAC, and this is my turn, this is my case I was going to share with y'all, stands for Delaware Community Reinvestment Action Council. And it is led by the woman there towards the right with the gray shirt, suit on, with the glasses.
The best smile.
With the great smile, Rashmi Reagan. And DCRAC is actually a 30-year organization. And a couple of interesting things about who they are and what they do is that they negotiate with creditors on behalf of residents, low-income residents in Wilmington and actually across the state. They are actually tax certified, so they actually go to bat on behalf of low-income folks for the IRS. They help folks modify their mortgages, stop the debt gap, and they also launched Stepping Stones Credit Union. And most recently, they are the only minority depository institution in the entire state of Delaware. So irrespective of the fact that, you know, they're amazing. Like, you know, Ebony and I and Mark think that they were amazing, but no one knew. Like, no one knew their power, their strength, and exactly what they were really offering to the larger ecosystem before their work with Spitfire Communications and through our project, Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color. And what I'm going to name here, I think, is there's one, and we've been talking about capacity building. There is a difference between capacity building and training. For-profit companies get to go out and hire consultants to come in and fix their problems. Nonprofits are told by funders and others in the ecosystem to go fix that thing, and then we can have a different conversation. But I think what Mark did through the use of the SMART chart was to help them actually create and shift their outreach strategy to understand that they needed to change the messenger and the message. Because they were a small organization as well. And they were also, frankly, and continue to be, the hellraisers that we need, hating and fighting. They were oftentimes alienated by big funders, right? So the work that Rashmi and her team did with Mark was, you have to like rebrand yourself, right? You need to change the identity of who you are so that the public and the general public really understand. And you also need to be really clear about who you're reaching through your communications. Before, it was just this all cast net, and then they actually created more of a targeted approach. And they understood that through that targeted approach, their messenger had to be other nonprofits who needed their services and who needed to partner with them because again, they are one of the only nonprofit credit unions in the state. They are one of the only nonprofits that really actually have lawyers on their team that are fighting on behalf of low-income residents. So these things is that they were doing internally, they needed to actually spread their understanding, the understanding of what they were doing as assets to their external partners. So when we talk about centering equity, these are the things that when you talk about wealth equity, you need somebody fighting for you financially, right? So Mark helped them to actually leverage the SMART chart to have a different impact on the communities, but also on how they were actually going to be connecting with the community partners. And I would say name two major things as an impact of their basically transformation is that in 2020, they were named Bank of America 2020 Neighborhood Builders Award. This is a prestigious opportunity that this small nonprofit, right, that didn't really have the branding or the identity just a year and a half before, they were one of 100 nonprofits that were awarded this grant. They were also just in 21 signed a national, a state MOU with a huge partner there, Reach Riverside. And they are a multidisciplinary partner, really providing the credit union support, the tax alliance support, all the supportive things that they need for these residents of part of this like purpose-built communities national project. And finally, and I mentioned this before, but this is really, really major. To be the only minority depository institution in the entire state is a huge recognition, because this is going to really truly allow them to accelerate their growth and impact even more. And in the words of Rashmi, Ebony and Mark know that I would much have rather have Rashmi on this webinar with you all, telling her own story, increasing her own visibility. But in her words, the SMART chart exercise forced us to step away so we can see the bigger picture. It was like zooming out and out and out until we saw clearly what we needed to see. Learning my weak spots, figuring how to strengthen them. So thank you, Mark, for all the work that you did with her, because now she is truly being seen and recognized as the leader that she is.
It's all Rashmi. She's amazing. I mean, you could power an entire city on her energy and drive that's there. They also have, food trucks. They have their mobile banking trucks. So they decided that in order to compete, they couldn't get the real estate that payday lenders had, so they can drive up their truck and really meet the audience where they are. Again, using strategic communication, taking it from that audience perspective made a huge difference. It's that zooming out thing.
I know we add real quickly too, that another reason why they did the ban was because she had a lot of clients who were elders and clients that just didn't have transportation to get to the community center. So that was another way of using that equity lens and understanding that you needed to go into the community.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ebony. The last one, Ebony, we'll go super fast on here with Build Wealth, just so we can have time for questions. I go ahead and give a brief overview, and then
I'll just briefly say Build Wealth Minnesota, they're in Minneapolis, but they're doing some statewide work. They provide comprehensive financial wellness. They do housing development work, and they also provide lending services for small businesses and home ownership for specifically the Black community. They have a goal of really trying to become an industry standard. So they have a big vision for themselves. They want to be a standard for generational wealth building for Black families and people of color, and really trying to have their particular comprehensive plan to be accredited, and to really trying to figure out different ways to engage other flagship organizations to implement the program, really trying to take to scale, if you will. And they identified like 5 target regions that they're really looking to replicate this multi-city demonstration campaign, and really worked with Mark on some of the web-based branding, and really how do you bring in different city, government agencies as well, beyond the nonprofits, understanding the different type of partners that they would need. I'm gonna pass it over to you, Mark, because I know we're short on time, but one of the things I will say that they communicated lastly to us about their partnership with Mark was that it really helped them to clearly articulate and effectively communicate their goals, their strategies, and to become better storytellers, really helping them to identify those decision makers in their audience of stakeholders that they were really targeting.
Thank you, Ebony. To Angela, answer the question, what role did equity play in the communications here? They did not talk about redlining as clear, the story. They did not name the problem of discrimination of this in North Minneapolis, and really started changing the way they talked about that, recognizing lifting up these issues is very different from saying we have these many people without jobs or limited housing or so, and really flipping that. We worked a lot through this. This was the Smart Chart 4.0 to lift up and turn up the volume on these problems, which they did not name before. And doing so, able to see this is central to equity within, and a lot of changes happening in Minneapolis, specifically northern Minneapolis. All right, to wrap this up before we go to questions, Smart Chart is great, right? Everybody's used it, but we've got to make it portable. Take it with you. And so we spent a lot of time redesigning the website. And here's the really key thing you can see on this. We made it like a Google Doc. So as we are all in different places and working from home, this allows you to work with your partners, come up and plan communications together. This collaborative nature of this website and the Smart Chart is really transformative. And this also makes a big difference, not just during pandemic times, but as you're working with partners on different coalitions. We know having set communications and clear messaging around larger coalitions, this is a way you can do that. And you simply go in, you have your list of charts that are there, you pull one up, you say, oh, I want to download it. No, I want to add some more collaborators. And so you add the collaborator on there, and you can invite them, and you're all working on this document together. So those are the things that we did. It's easy to get started. And again, you can go deep on science on here. There's tips along the way, external resources. And it's, again, this takes the power of strategic communication and makes it easy and simple for nonprofits, foundations to use. Okay.
All right, gang, you can join us in the Q&A box. That's where I'm going to be looking for questions. But Elbert, I agree with you. This is just a fantastic way to use web design. The big thing here, going from printing it out and playing on paper and trying to pass that along to openly collaborating. For our team, at the small but mighty team at the network, we live on Google Docs, so we are big fans. Totally get that collaborating in real time is transformational. So kudos to you all. Gang, we have a question. I'm going to get to that and throw others in there. You can vote. Cindy has a question, that is, how was Smart Chart 4.0 funded? Who paid for this?
This was Spitfire. It's previously, there were different funders that started. I believe the Hewlett Foundation and Packard Foundation were some of the original funders for the first Smart Chart, and various others. But this is Spitfire, and this is putting it out there for free. It's a tool that so many groups have used, a lot within the environmental movement, a lot in the National Park Service uses this. It's a tool for everybody to use. So,
one of the things when we invited folks, we really promised, and I invite Lillian and Ebony to hop in here too, was to really talk about how one of the pieces that's really become apparent, it's really necessary as we move forward, is thinking about inclusion and equity as we're thinking about comms. And so you talked about SMARTY goals, but maybe we could just talk about how that fits for all the folks who are tuning in, who are doing their daily work. How does it show up on the daily? What are some of the practices that people need to be thinking about, both in the planning and in the execution, that really lands and centers equity and thinking about inclusion? And sometimes it's not just the tactics. The other thing, I'll just pre-bake this, is the active listening, who you're talking to, who's at the table, all of that. But maybe invite all three of you to sort of weigh in there. What does equity look like, and what does inclusion look like in comms in this moment that we're in?
One of the things I would share just to get us started for me, especially given, the communities that we're working for and that our partners are supporting is when possible, let the community be their own voice. Let them share their own stories so that they actually own the stories and no one is telling their story for them.
I co-sign that, Ebony. I also would offer a critical understanding of the social economic context. And I know that that framing, or the context, is the framing of part of the SMART chart. I think it's important because if you are telling a story about a community, understand what is rooted in. To Mark's point earlier about redlining in Bill Walsh, Minnesota, it really wasn't a part of the analysis or the framing before, but that history is an important part of being able to effectively demonstrate their vitality, why they're needed as an organization, what they're trying to shift and move in the ecosystem. I think is really important to spend some time. The other piece I will add is if you do that work, do the work of also reframing from a deficiency lens, deficiency framework when you're talking about communities of color, organizations of color, and use more of a structural analysis as to why we are seeing the consequences, right, of frankly, economic inequality nationally. And what we see is the consequence. So if you make sure that you avoid a deficiency framework, you're going to have more of a positive narrative, and then we'll get to more actually strategic thinking around the solution solving.
And so much there. I know there's more questions. Just finally, it's checking the narrative that you're in and understanding that you might be reinforcing a really harmful frame around an issue, even word choice. So being able to be aware of that, and through a step-by-step guide, understanding who the audience is, their values, who's the best messenger for it. Maybe it's not me. I'd love it to be, but understanding those things allow communications to be more equitable. It's sort of at the heart of good strategic communication, starting with the audience, but understanding these larger power structures and the barriers and opportunities that are out there.
A couple questions. If we have limited time, let's see if we can get to them. One is, you mentioned using the chart in a previous example, using the SMART chart, they ended up changing their messenger and the message. Curious, who was the previous messenger? And can you talk about the process of that light bulb moment? And just as importantly, for all of us tuning in, was there any resistance internally? Were there folks who were a little taken aback by this idea of shifting?
Absolutely. And this was in Delaware with Rashmi. And for so many nonprofits who are almost powered by passion, this is the going out there and doing that work, and we're here to help. That disconnect between what they're offering in the services and the community who's not banked and not in a financial institution, and you come with all the pamphlets and list every single service that we have for you, is overwhelming. A lot of CDCs are that way. We do this, instead of understanding what does the audience need. And so they shifted from a lot of their work trying to go out there and get people to sign up, working with partner nonprofits who are dealing with returning citizens, that are dealing with students who are graduating, any of these things, and saying, hey, have you thought about this? The other audience, which is the trusted nonprofits working with the community, are able to translate and share, and they're the messenger that's there because they have the trust. Instead of, hey, look at us right here, we do all these things for you. And so there was actually a bit more relief that communications can be done there. But now you have a new audience. You got to make sure you're managing and taking care of all the people who are bringing in additional participants for your programs.
It's really interesting how we've arrived at this moment where people are starting to understand that networks are in fact huge engines of creating equity and inclusion, that you don't always have to do the work. Sometimes the most efficient way, as Lillian said, is don't do it. Leave it to somebody else who's going to be much more effective. Payal has a good question, and this is a sticky wicket. I'm going to dare you all to be brave on this one. What if there is fear of losing a large individual funder support if you're framing your issue in the bigger picture or in terms of social inequity? So where are some of the dangers if we step back and start thinking strategy and systems, that maybe we change the way we talk about our work, but potentially alienate folks in the process?
A quick answer. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say a quick answer on that is that the answers don't have to be binary, nor do those funders or supporters. Understanding that everybody can move on the spectrum of change, but some people are not going to take that step and be over here. So understanding how you can move them slowly to see that, or wait for them to get there. But those who deny sort of reality or this history that's there, I think those are the funders you can leave behind and wait.
I'd add, and I don't mean to jump in here because Ebony and Lillian, I'd love to hear from you, but I think it's a values question too. You obviously have funders. There must be a level of shared values that brought you together. Tap into those and find ways to have those hard conversations. Ebony, Lillian, anything to add there?
That's where I was going, the values, making sure that, you are working with a funder where your values are aligned. And if you reach a point in your work where that's just not the case, then I think it's an opportunity for you to find some funders that actually are more aligned with you. But definitely try to do what Mark said first. Try to bring them along, understanding that you may not be able to come with a messaging that's at 10, but maybe at 5, to try to help them to understand, because we also want, where we can influence others to understand it better, we want to do that as well. But if you've exhausted that, then it's time for you to move on and find somebody else. And there are a lot of funders out here who say this is the type of work that they want to invest in. So you're just going to have to do your homework.
And I'll offer a solution. I use in my own practice a model by FSG, and I'll drop it into the chat and we can get it out to you all, consulting group. And they talk about the 6 conditions of social change. And narrative framing is one of the conditions, right? So that, to the point, I'm co-signing Mark and Ebony. There's actually some frameworks out there to help you have that conversation, to move your funders along the continuum of understanding how we actually get to equity.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mute. Hey, Sean.
Last question's a good one. It's from Isabel, which is, where can we access the tool? So if we want to start playing with this right now or tomorrow, share it with friends, how do we do so?
Is that the Smart Chart? It's at smartchart.org. Very simple, very easy. And
anyone can use it and it's free. Is that correct?
Anyone can use it and it's free. Absolutely. Smartchart.org. We ask you to spark change for all your work. That's what all good communication should do. And it's the wind and the solar of change, not the fuel or not the oil. Let's change the metaphor.
And actually, we have one more question that come in a little bit late. If y'all can hang with us.
Sure.
The 6 conditions link, Lillian, it's right there if you need it, Erica. So I think, gang, that's what we've got. This conversation isn't going to end. We're going to continue to have it. As a matter of fact, D21, I hope I don't sound like a shilling salesman here, but John A. Powell from the Othering and Belonging Institute at University of California, Berkeley, is amazing. And a lot of the conversation we're going to have with him, he's going to be our closing keynote at V, is going to be talking about othering and belonging. And just as importantly, very much our work as communicators, we are community builders, we are builders, we are bridge builders. It is our job to help people move them forward. We may not get them where they need to go, but we can move them in that direction. That's a big piece of our work. So how do we do that without alienating folks? And centering equity and inclusion is going to be a big theme that we'll be exploring in just a couple of weeks at P21. With that, I get to thank Mark and Ebony and Lillian, and of course, my friend Kenya for being with us. Grateful to all of you for making time on a hot summer day. We will be back, and as we always do, this has been recorded, so give us 24 hours, maybe at the outside 40, 48, but Kareem is fast. We'll put this up at comnetwork.org, and you'll be able to watch a replay. Feel free to share it with friends. With that, be safe and well, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you and everyone for the contributions y'all made. We'll see you again very, very soon. Be well.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Ebony.
Thanks, everybody. Ebony, Lillian, deeply
Lillian.
appreciate you, Kenya, as well. And thank you, Corbin and Tristan. Cheers.